A place of rest for the dead, it is unsurprising that graveyards have a reputation for ghosts and spirits. And indeed, all across the world, dark tales and terrifying legends are connected to cemeteries, with stories of everything from mysterious moving coffins to portals to hell to vampires. Since the early 1800s, a family vault in a Barbadian graveyard has been associated with spooky happenings. The chilling stories can be traced back to 1808 and the tragic burial of 2-year-old Anne Maria Chase. The child was placed inside a lead coffin and laid to rest in the Chase family's vault in Oyston's Christchurch Parish Cemetery, alongside the vault's single other occupant, a Mrs. Thomasina Goddard. In 1812, little Anne Maria found another companion in her sister Dorcas, who was interred in the family's tomb after allegedly starving herself to death. Death continued to plague the Chase family when Thomas Chase, the girl's father, was also interred in the vault, having been constructed from massive blocks of stone, cemented together so firmly that it looks as if they were hewn out of solid rock, and covered by a formidable slab of marble. The vault would have required 6 or 7 people to open it. As such, onlookers were shocked to discover that once the vault was opened to lay Thomas Chase to rest, the 3 coffins inside had moved. No longer in their orderly positions, the caskets of the 2 girls and Mrs. Goddard were in disarray, violently disturbed, seemingly having been tossed about by someone or something possessing incredible strength. Similar disturbances were discovered in 1816 and 1819, when others were buried in the vault. By now, people were beginning to suspect either supernatural or malevolent earthly involvement, and so in 1820 an inspection of the vault was ordered by the island's governor. Despite the coffins having been returned to their original positions each time the tomb was unsealed, the dead were once again found scattered about the vault when it was opened for the examination. The vault was once again resealed, with various tamper-proof measures put in place. Fine sand was sprinkled on the floor so as to reveal the footprints of any intruders, and official government seals were stamped into the cement to indicate any unlawful opening. It remained sealed for several months. During this time, it is said that local people heard strange sounds and screams coming from within. When the vault was subsequently reopened, the coffins were once more found flung about the tomb. No one, however, had broken the seal, and the sand was undisturbed by footprints. With no earthly explanation for why this was happening, with earthquakes and other natural disturbances being ruled out as a cause, rumours of a curse began to circulate. Determined that the dead should rest, all the coffins were removed from the vault and reburied elsewhere in the cemetery. After this, with no coffins left to toss about, the phenomena ceased, and so the empty vault remains until this day, abandoned but not forgotten, filled only with ghost stories. Holy Trinity Church sits atop of a hill overlooking the small market town of BUCKFASTLEIGH in Devon, England. A place of worship since at least the 13th century, the church is now a ruin, having suffered a fire in the summer of 1992. Spooky and skeletal, the church's bells survived the fire and were rehung, and can still be heard ringing out across the valley. It is not, however, the decaying church that has a dark reputation, but rather its graveyard. There lurks a strange small building, a single tomb encased behind strong metal bars. The tomb belongs to Richard Cabell, the 17th century squire of nearby Brook Manor. He, it is whispered, was a monstrously evil man, a figure of darkness who local legend records as having beaten and abused his wife, until one night she escaped, fleeing across the moors with her husband in hot pursuit. It is said that he eventually caught up with her, after which he ended her life, and the life of her loyal dog, who tried to protect her until the end. Cabell went unpunished, with it rumoured that he made a pact with Satan himself in order to escape justice, The man was, however, supposedly haunted by the spirit of his wife's canine protector for the rest of his life. On the 5th of July 1677, Cabell passed away. On the night of his interment into the family tomb, it is said that a pack of phantom hounds raced across the moors to howl at his graveside. According to some versions of the legend, Cabell's spirit rose from his grave to join them, leading the ghostly hounds on an all-night hunt, snatching and tearing to pieces any and every unfortunate living creature they came across. From then on the anniversary of his death, the hellish phantom of Richard Cabell would be seen stalking the moors and the area around his final resting place. Terrified by his dark spirit and his diabolical connection, local people installed thick iron bars around his tomb in an attempt to keep him in. A heavy stone slab was also placed on top of his grave. Regardless, even after such precautions, some claim to have seen a strange red glow emanating through the iron bars. Some even say that on certain nights, a whole host of demonic creatures gather at Cabell's grave, trying to retrieve the promised soul for their master. London's Highgate Cemetery has an infamous reputation. The home of vampires and ghosts, this Victorian necropolis is considered to be one of the creepiest places in London, if not the world. Crumbling and overgrown with weeds, the graveyard is claustrophobic, closed in on all sides by imposing vast family tombs and striking Gothic angels. Ivy grows freely, and a sudden chilling wind is said to rush through the cemetery, regardless of the weather. For years, stories circulated about the existence of vampires in the graveyard. An ominous grey figure was said to stalk the tombs, as was the figure of a tall man in a hat, a woman in white, and a horrifying figure who was seen wading into a pond. It was even suggested that Highgate Cemetery was the haunt of the king of all vampires, and was, as such, a hotbed of black magic rituals. What followed was a media storm. People were both curious and terrified of vampiric interference, so much so that on the night of Halloween 1968, a group of people visited another London cemetery and desecrated several graves. One, a new grave, was dug up and the coffin opened. Their most macabre act was driving an iron stake in the form of a cross through the lid and into the breast of the corpse. What is known as the Highgate vampire sensation reached a peak in 1970, when two vampire hunters, David Farrant and Sean Manchester, descended on the cemetery in an attempt to cleanse the site of the vampire. In a bizarre public display of paranormal rivalry, each claimed that he could and would expel or destroy the vampiric spectre. As such, Manchester declared he would conduct an exorcism on the evening of Friday the 13th of March 1970. What followed was the appearance of a mob of self-proclaimed hunters who arrived at the locked cemetery and swarmed the gates and walls, despite police efforts to control the crowd. Only a couple of months later, on the 1st of August 1970, the charred and headless remains of a woman's body were found not far from the cemetery. Manchester and Farrant's duel continued for decades, with further instances of grave desecration and reports of vampires at Highgate. Although the supposed king of all vampires was never caught, several corpses were desecrated, with Manchester himself admitting to having lifted the lid off one coffin after allegedly being led there by his psychic helper. According to the story, he was about to drive a stake through the body it contained when a companion persuaded him not to. Reluctantly, Manchester resealed the coffin and left garlic and incense in the vault. Today, Highgate Cemetery is accessible by ticketed access only. With the gates locked at night, the question remains, are they to keep intruders out or to keep the dead in? Another graveyard with a vampiric connection is Lafayette Cemetery in Colorado. A Transylvanian immigrant, Fodor Glava, came to America like many others, seeking a better life. And like many others, what he found was a modest, if not impoverished, existence. working in the coal mines of Lafayette, a small mining town in Colorado. As such, at the time of his death in 1918, he was buried alongside another in what would have been the poorest section of the old graveyard. That year, many others, struck down by the flu that was sweeping the world, joined Glauber in the earth. Lafayette Cemetery soon started to fill, with visitors to the graveyard drawn to Glauber's headstone and its hastily etched carvings. It is thought that the mention of Transylvania on his gravestone spurred rumours that he was a vampire. Not only that, it was whispered that his pale and lanky appearance in life were not merely physical attributes, but signs that Glauber was, in fact, one of the undead. As time went by, a story arose that Glauber had been seen roaming the immigrant section of the cemetery. Eventually, according to local folklore, a group of townspeople decided to excavate his grave. What they found was terrifying. Glauber's teeth seemed larger than normal, and there was blood in his mouth. Convinced this was evidence of his undead nature, they drove a stake through his heart and reburied him. A cedar tree now grows straight through the grave plot, supposedly having grown from the wooden stake plunged into Glauber's chest. Red rose bushes also grow nearby, with these said to have grown from his gnarled, blood-stained fingernails. Even to this day, rumours persist that Lafayette Cemetery is haunted by a mysterious figure late at night. Is it Fodor Glauber, risen from his grave to terrorise the living? Many believe yes, and in an attempt to appease his undead soul, continue to leave offerings of flowers, coins, and small trinkets at his grave. It is not an understatement to say that America has a plethora of haunted cemeteries. Some of these supernatural locations are even said to be so sinister that they contain portals to hell. Ranked as one of the most terrifying and off-limits graveyards in the world, Stull Cemetery has such an infamous reputation that the Pope is said to make his plane fly around it. And its reputation is as dark as can be: cursed ground, witchcraft, satanic cults, strange deaths, and even a staircase that leads straight to hell. Hidden away in rural Kansas, the town of Stull was founded by Pennsylvania Dutch settlers in 1867. They built the stone church in the center of the cemetery and used it to practice their Anabaptist religion until the start of the 20th century, when it was abandoned after the roof collapsed. Now empty, the church has crumbled into ruin. Meanwhile, the myths and legends surrounding Stull have grown and flourished. One of the many legends that surrounds Stull Cemetery is that it marks one of the 7 gateways to hell. According to folklore, twice a year, at the stroke of midnight on Halloween and the spring equinox, a stone staircase manifests in the cemetery. This is a stairway to hell, and is said to be used by the devil to enter the mortal world. Once there, he is said to stalk the graveyard, rousing the dead from their graves to commit evil. Another story centers on Stull's supposed hanging tree, a tree in the graveyard where condemned witches were put to death. Although the tree is now gone, its sinister aura remains. Another remnant of evil in the graveyard is an old tombstone inscribed with the word Wittich. Local people whisper that the grave is the final resting place for the bones of a child of Satan, an infant who was supposedly born deformed and covered in wolf hair. Such horrifying stories have helped fuel Stull's reputation, so much so that on the night of Halloween 1988, nearly 500 people gathered at the gates of the graveyard, hoping to witness Satan ascend from hell. They caused so much damage that the local sheriff's department has posted deputies on the property every Halloween since. At other times of year, the town of Stull is equally suspicious of visitors, meaning that the cemetery has never been investigated properly. As such, with accessibility an issue, Stull Cemetery has become one of America's most evil graveyards that most have never heard of. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more of the paranormal. Not forgetting to click the bell icon to turn on all notifications of new content. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter over on paranormalscholar.com to get email notifications straight to your inbox. All that is left is for me to wish you a happy Halloween. Stay safe, stay protected, and sleep well. Until next time.